Today is Saba Saba Day. 34 years ago, I was a young journalist, having just launched my career about 6 years earlier, but I did not touch politics. I was, of course, completely unaware of my destiny and my purpose. But still, it was difficult to ignore the unprecedented political activities that were unfolding in Kenya at that time. Saba Saba Day in 1990 was a Saturday, and the opposition at the time had announced a major rally at the historical Kumekucha grounds in Nairobi. And in those days, protests were unheard of. Challenging the mighty Serikali or Sirikali was known to be suicidal. But Kenyans at the time were completely and utterly fed up with the dictatorial, propaganda specialist Moi regime. And predictably, the government had already reacted days before that historical Saba Saba Saturday arrived. Various leading lights in the opposition had been arrested and detained without trial. Kenneth Stanley Jindo Matiba, Charles Rubia, Raila Amolo Odinga had all been arrested. Whereabouts unknown. Early in the same year, the charred remains of the then Cabinet Secretary Foreign Affairs, Dr. John Robert Ouko, had been found close to Kisumu. And the late Ouko had not been in the opposition. In fact, he was a great defender in foreign lands of the one-party dictatorial regime of Daniel Toroitich arap Moi. And so Kenyans were already aware that the government had started eating its own children. And anybody who had any doubts, those doubts had flown off the window with the circulation, chini ya maji, of a very interesting document which emerged from a publication in Uganda. And this document was titled Operation Bikini, which were the initials of the then powerful minister in the Moi inner circle, a man called Nicholas Kipiator Biwott. Saba Saba Day 1990 was not a sunny day, it was a cloudy day. And a handful of very brave Kenyan patriots, Gitobu Imanyara, Martin Shikuku, Kimani Wanyoike, James Agri Orengo, and others, emerged seemingly from nowhere at the back of an old pickup, complete with megaphones and flashing the two-finger salute, and headed to the Kumekucha grounds for the rally. They never got there. They were intercepted by the security boys, and after a brief cat and mouse game, were arrested. But protests against the government erupted, and Kenyan patriots lost their lives. The official numbers released by the government were less than half a dozen. The actual numbers were dozens of Kenyans lost their lives. President Moi at the time completely ignored the very significant activities that had unfolded on that Saturday, July 7th, 1990. But Kenyans already knew that Moi had told us KANU would rule for 100 years. He had also shown to us foreign ideology, multi-party democracy, which was not suitable for Africa, would never come to Kenya under his watch. And of course, most political analysts at the time believed the self-proclaimed professor of politics, who had made very, very few mistakes up to that point. But fate had different ideas. Just a handful of months later, in a very unexpected move, at a KANU delegates conference at Keserani, we called it at the time, announced the reintroduction of multi-party democracy to Kenya. And that was the beginning of the end of the KANU regime. Fast forward to the present. I'm making this recording in the early hours of Saba Saba Day, Sunday, July 7th, the year of our Lord, 2024. And the huge difference on this Saba Saba Day is that it is clear to keen political observers that the Ruto regime is crumbling, and crumbling fast. Countrywide protests triggered by the youngsters, the Gen Zs, have exposed the very vulnerable side, the soft underbelly, if you like, of the Ruto regime and powerful state machinery. Although not everybody can smell freedom, because the protests last Thursday were more than a little disappointing, with a no-show from protesters, or shall we say low turnout and pockets of protests only in parts of the country. But to some of us analysts, it is very clear that the days of the Ruto regime are numbered. The Gen Zs have come out with a new announcement about 14 days of focus, which includes Tuesdays and Thursdays of protests. And most inexperienced analysts have completely missed the very devastating things unfolding, devastating to the Ruto regime and its survival, which I want to highlight and discuss and analyze on my show on this important Saba Saba Day 2024. And let us start with the thing that the Ruto regime has done to itself to finish itself, and that is the abductions and the use of live resources on unarmed protesters. Something that internal CS Kithure Kindiki does not support. In fact, hates. But clearly, there are rather more powerful people in the regime who have been pushing for it. And that one, that is one of the most devastating mistakes this regime has done in its bid to hang on desperately to power. Because for starters, the Gen Zs and the other protesters have not missed the opportunity to make full use of it to inspire other Kenyans not to give up the struggle. For instance, to wrap the bodies of the casualties in the Kenyan flag and also the caskets, has had a very huge psychological impact. Nabado, please allow me to give you a glimpse of what has unfolded on the ground in my late political lecturer's hometown of Machakos during the burial first victim of these protests, Rex Masai. Locals are still in shock and asking themselves, who was this Rex Masai? Why is he so famous? Why is he being buried like a very big man? a very important Kenyan. And yet he was just a youngster, unknown to most. And super fascinating. His body was transported to Kadhiani constituency, the very same constituency where my late political lecturer was born, and is indeed interred, not very far from where my late wife also lies. It is a relatively remote, poverty-stricken area of Machakos, where the message of liberation of the country called Kenya has arrived very forcefully. With the arrival of the remains of the very first victim, and so far the most famous, of these protests of what is definitely the third and final liberation of our motherland. To be clear, we would have been in a very different place had the protests happened so far without any fatalities, especially from the police. And indeed, this is a very telltale sign to those of us who study the fall of regimes the world over. Because usually, desperate self-destructive moves like this one by the Kenya police are usually not missing very close to the fall of a regime. I believe the problem is, the world over, it takes too long for the regime to realize that their most powerful weapon of fear is actually gone. And insisting on using it only speeds up their exit. But there is something else unfolding, which many have not paid too much attention to. That is even more deadly for this regime and will speed up its exit even more. And that is the mind-blowing exposure that has just started. Just to give you one example, a character calling himself Pillar of Hope has emerged in forums on Twitter, and is very fast going viral. And this man is revealing way too much inside secrets of Ruto and his regime. For starters, it is clear that he is an insider, or at least he was an insider, because he has too much information, a lot of it much stranger than fiction, much more bizarre and mind-blowing than any fiction somebody can invent, and it is very damaging. It is in the public domain that it is still a mystery to this very day where the Eurobond money went. But Pillar of Hope has given us details of exactly where it went. Into people's pockets, and he names these people. And some of these individuals actually established major investments that they're still reaping from to this day. Folks, this has taken our ongoing season of exposure to another level. Now it is important for us to fully understand and grasp what is happening here. Okay? And what is happening here is what happened to Uhuru, President Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta, the fourth president of Kenya. Exactly what happened to him at the tail end of his administration. In one word, betrayals. Many ambitious, greedy Kenyans saw what was coming long before most Kenyans saw it. And therefore, what did? They jumped onto the winning train. not for the good of Kenyans, but for their personal gain, to ensure that when that regime came into power, they would be in the gravy train. Their lives would change. Money would stop being a problem or a challenge in their lives. And looking back, many of us who did not fully understand what was happening were puzzled. Moses Wetangula, always in the opposition, he jumped onto the Ruto bandwagon. Musalia Mudavadi, the same, and many others. And we wondered, what are these people doing? When it is very clear who is going to win this election. Of course, we forgot that in this part of the world, you don't have to have the majority votes to win an election. Or maybe we banked too much on the fact that Uhuru Kenyatta was president and would ensure a free and fair election. Well, we were all wrong. But some people were right, and they ended up at the right place at the right time, when the shock winner of the 2022 presidential elections was announced by one Wafula Chebukati. Well, exactly the same thing is happening now to Ruto. A number of very powerful Kenyans who are insiders, who know too much about the Ruto regime, have realized that the Ruto ship is sinking, and they have quickly jumped off. And in a bid to establish themselves on the right side of history, they have started singing. To put it the way the mafia used to put it. They are singing like birds. They are singing without ceasing. And the revelations and the exposure against the Ruto regime are almost beginning to become overwhelming. Too much information to process in a very short period of time. And sadly for some Kenyans, some politicians we admire, and other Kenyans who decided to make good late in the day, are going to fall victim to this exposure. One example is, wait for this one, former President Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta and his family. Very rapidly, just before our eyes, the narrative that all politicians in Kenya currently must go is gaining momentum. And for the very obvious reason that this exposure is telling us that all these politicians are involved in deals, both those in the opposition and those in government. They are actually the same. That is what the exposure seems to be revealing. And in the process, pushing very hard for a fresh start that may even leave out many champions of reform who are currently in politics, and even others who are currently activists. Now, of course, this is hardly surprising. It's not a surprise to those of us who are spiritual, because we know that the judgment of the Ancient of Days does not spare. And that same judgment also goes back in history to sins of the past, things that happened in Kenya decades ago that set the stage for the mess we currently find ourselves in. My friends, have a great Saba Saba day, even as you reflect on some of these very weighty issues and skeletons from closets that we have been forced to face, and we will be forced to face in the coming days, weeks, and months. Please allow me to take just 1 minute of your precious time to thank once again those who have responded to the semi-annual Kumekucha gifting. I believe you can see details on your screens right now. I am very grateful. I will be forever grateful, even to those of you who are still on the way coming. Almighty God bless you mightily. Even as you support this cause for a better Kenya that is bigger than me, bigger than all of us. Asanteni sana na mbarikiwe. Until next time, this is Chris Kumekucha.